The alien girl stood alone inside the vast reception chamber of the orbital station. The room was made of smooth silver metal and soft blue light, designed to calm visiting species. For her, it did nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she held them together in front of her chest. Her name was Luri, daughter of House Selthar, a minor noble family of the Velari people. She had been raised to be calm, graceful, and obedient. Today, all of that training felt useless. She had been promised to a human. The promise was old, written into a treaty signed many cycles ago when the Velari first made contact with humanity. At that time, humans were weak compared to most spacefaring species. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were crude. But they were stubborn and they refused to disappear. Over time, they grew stronger, too strong. Now they stood as one of the core pillars of the interstellar coalition. The treaty demanded balance. To secure long-term peace, a Velari noble would be promised to a human representative. Not as property, the diplomats insisted. As a symbol of trust. But symbols could still be broken, and Luri feared she would be the one to shatter. She had heard the stories since childhood. Humans were emotional, violent, and unpredictable. They bonded too deeply, fought too fiercely, and never knew when to stop. Some said they were monsters hiding behind polite words. Others said they were heroes who burned themselves alive to save strangers. Both versions frightened her. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. "He is here," an attendant whispered. Luri's heart raced. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin the way she had been taught. Her long, pale hair was braided carefully, traditional and respectful. Her eyes, large and dark, reflected the lights above as the massive doors at the far end of the chamber slid open. The human entered alone. That was the first surprise. He wore no heavy armor, no ceremonial uniform filled with medals. Instead, he wore a simple dark outfit, practical and clean. He was taller than most Velari, broader at the shoulders, but not threatening in the way she expected. His movements were controlled, careful, as if he were aware of how much space he took. His name was Ethan Cole. He stopped several steps away from her and waited. He did not stare. He did not move closer. He placed one hand over his chest and inclined his head slightly. "Luri of House Selthar," he said calmly, "it's an honor to meet you." His voice was steady, not loud, not demanding. Luri blinked. She had expected commands or silence, or maybe hunger in his eyes, the way some alien nobles looked at her like she was an object to be traded. Instead, he looked nervous. She bowed in return, her movements precise. "Ethan Cole of Earth," she replied. "The honor is mutual." That was not entirely true, but it was polite. They stood there for a moment, neither moving. The observers behind the transparent walls whispered among themselves. This meeting was being recorded, analyzed, and judged by diplomats from a dozen worlds. Ethan broke the silence. "I want to say this clearly before anything else," he said. "You don't owe me fear, and you don't owe me obedience. Whatever this promise means to the treaty, I want you to know I won't force anything on you." Luri felt her breath catch. That was not what she had prepared for. "You will not claim me?" she asked carefully. Ethan frowned slightly as if confused by the question. "Claim you? No, that's not how humans do things, at least not anymore." Her training faltered. "Then why accept the promise?" He thought for a moment. "Because peace matters, and because I believe promises should protect people, not trap them." Those words struck something deep inside her. They were escorted to a private observation lounge overlooking the stars. The glass wall revealed endless space, bright with distant suns and drifting ships. The door closed behind them, sealing them in quiet. Luri sat on one side of the table. Ethan sat on the other, leaving space between them. Again, he did not invade her distance. "I was told humans dislike silence," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "We dislike bad silence. This one's okay." She studied him carefully now. His face showed signs of age and experience. Small scars marked his hands and jaw. These were not decorations, they were reminders. "What do humans think of the Velari?" she asked. "Honestly," he said, "yes. We think you're strong," he replied, "but tired, like you've been carrying expectations for too long." Her fingers tightened around each other. No one had ever said that aloud. They spoke for a long time after that, about simple things, about the station, about Earth's oceans and Velari sky forests. Ethan described rain falling on metal cities, the smell of soil after storms. Lurie spoke of floating gardens and crystal rivers. Slowly the fear in her chest loosened. The moment shattered when the alarms began. Red lights flashed, the station trembled. "Security breach," a mechanical voice announced. "All personnel remain in place." Ethan was on his feet instantly, his calm transformed into sharp focus. He moved to the door, checking the panel. "What is happening?" Lurie asked, her voice shaking. "Someone doesn't like this treaty," he said, "and they chose today to make that clear." The station shook again. A distant explosion echoed through the metal corridors. Ethan turned to her. "Can you move fast?" "Yes," she said, standing. "Good, stay close but not behind me. If I fall, you run." "I will not leave you," she said before thinking. He looked at her, surprised, then nodded once. "Fair enough." The door opened partially, revealing smoke and flickering lights. Ethan moved first, scanning, alert. His movements were practiced, efficient. This was a man who had walked into danger many times before. They moved through the corridors as alarms screamed. Broken panels sparked. Security drones lay destroyed. Whoever attacked knew exactly where to strike. A blast rocked the corridor ahead, throwing them both to the ground. Ethan rolled instantly, shielding Lurie with his body as debris rained down. She felt his weight, solid and protective. When the dust settled, he pushed himself up, grimacing. Blood ran from a cut on his arm. "You're injured," she said. "I'll live," he replied. "Can you walk?" She nodded. They reached an emergency lift just as hostile forces breached the corridor behind them. The doors closed and the lift dropped rapidly toward the lower levels of the station. Lurie's heart pounded. Why are they doing this? "Because humans and Velari standing together scares some people," Ethan said, "especially when it might actually work." The lift stopped abruptly. The lights went out. They were alone in darkness, suspended between levels. Lurie's breathing became fast and shallow. Ethan spoke softly. "Hey, you're okay. Focus on my voice." She did. In that moment, surrounded by danger and silence, Lurie realized something terrifying and wonderful. Her fate had already changed. Not because of a treaty, not because of a promise, but because the human beside her chose to stand with her instead of above her. And whatever waited ahead, the galaxy would not remain the same after this meeting. The emergency lights flickered back on, weak and red, casting long shadows inside the stalled lift. The station groaned around them like a wounded beast. Lurie pressed her back against the cold metal wall, trying to steady her breathing. The sudden darkness had shaken her more than the explosions. Ethan stood near the control panel, one hand braced against the wall, the other still bleeding slowly from the cut on his arm. He ignored the pain, his eyes focused on the flickering symbols on the panel. "The lift is jammed," he said calmly, "but it's not falling, that's good." Lurie swallowed. "Is anyone coming for us?" "Eventually," he replied, "but not fast enough." The station shook again, lighter this time, but close. Distant weapons fire echoed through the metal. Whatever force had attacked the station was still moving, still hunting. Lurie forced herself to speak. "You could have escaped alone. Humans are faster than Velari." Ethan looked at her, genuinely confused. "Why would I do that?" "Because I am the reason this happened." He shook his head. "No, this happened because someone chose violence, that's on them." She studied his face in the red light. There was no anger there, no blame. Only determination. He pulled a small emergency kit from his belt and pressed a sealant strip over his wound. "I need to get us out of here. When the doors open, stay behind me." She nodded. With a sharp twist of exposed wiring and a burst of sparks, the lift doors slid open halfway. Smoke poured in from the corridor outside. Ethan forced them open wider with a grunt of effort. The hallway beyond was damaged but passable. They moved quickly, stepping over fallen panels and broken drones. Lurie stayed close just as he had asked, watching how his body shifted between her and every possible threat. They reached a junction where the corridor split. Ethan stopped, listening. Footsteps. Not human. Too light, too many. We're not alone, he whispered. Before Lurie could respond, energy bolts ripped through the air. Ethan shoved her behind a support column as the wall exploded beside them. "Stay down," he shouted. The attackers emerged from the smoke, sleek armored figures with elongated helmets. Velari rebels. Their markings were unmistakable. Lurie's chest tightened. "They're my people," she whispered. "Not acting like it," Ethan replied. He fired a short burst from his sidearm, precise and controlled. He didn't aim to kill, only to disable, forcing the attackers back behind cover. Lurie watched in shock. Humans were said to fight wildly, with rage and noise. Ethan fought like a storm contained within glass, focused, efficient, controlled. One of the rebels shouted in Velari, "Stand aside, human. The girl belongs to us." Ethan answered without hesitation. "She belongs to herself." Those words hit Lurie harder than any explosion. The rebels advanced again. Ethan grabbed Lurie's hand. "We move now." They ran. Corridors blurred as alarms screamed. Lurie's lungs burned, but she did not slow. Fear pushed her forward, but something else did too, a strange, growing trust. They burst into a service bay and sealed the door behind them. Ethan leaned against it, breathing hard. "We can't keep running," he said. "They'll corner us." Lurie looked around. Crates, tools, a small emergency shuttle docked at the far end. Hope flared in her chest. "That shuttle," she said, "it can reach the inner ring." Ethan followed her gaze and nodded. "Good eye." As they moved toward it, Lurie hesitated. "Ethan, if they capture me, the treaty may still survive." He stopped walking. "No," he said firmly. "They're not after peace. They're after control, and I'm not trading your freedom for a lie." Her throat tightened. "Why do you care so much?" He looked away for a moment. "Because I've seen what happens when people decide someone else's life for them, and because you trusted me." Before she could respond, the bay door behind them buckled. The rebels were breaking through. Ethan ushered her into the shuttle and sealed the hatch. He rushed to the controls, powering it up just as the door gave way. The shuttle launched violently, scraping against the bay walls before shooting into the open space of the station's inner ring. The sudden silence was overwhelming. Lurie slumped into her seat, shaking. They floated for a moment, stars drifting past the viewport. The station burned behind them, small explosions blooming like angry flowers. Ethan finally allowed himself to sit back. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them and looked at her. "You did great back there," he said. She laughed weakly. "I was terrified." "So was I," he admitted. That surprised her more than anything else. "Humans admit fear. All the time," he said. "We just don't let it decide for us." The shuttle docked with an isolated section of the inner ring, far from the main conflict. Emergency systems engaged, sealing them in a quiet, dim chamber. They were safe, for now. Hours passed. Rescue signals were sent. Neither spoke much. The adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion behind. Lurie finally broke the silence. "My people believe humans take what they want." Ethan met her gaze. "Some do, so do some Velari. That's not species, that's choice." She considered that. Her entire life had been shaped by duty and expectation. She had never been asked what she wanted. "What do you want, Ethan Cole?" she asked softly. He thought carefully before answering. "I want this alliance to mean something, and I want you to have a say in your own future." The door to the chamber finally opened, revealing coalition security forces. The danger was over. As they escorted the pair away, Lurie looked back at Ethan. The promise that once felt like a chain now felt like a door, and she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had tested them. And together, They had not broken. The chamber of the Interstellar Council was silent in a way that felt heavy and sharp at the same time. Hundreds of seats rose in wide arcs, filled with representatives from dozens of species. Light from distant stars filtered through the transparent ceiling, casting slow-moving shadows across the floor. At the center of the chamber stood two figures. Lurie of House Selthar stood tall, her hands steady at her sides. Ethan Cole stood beside her, his posture calm, his presence quiet but firm. They were no longer prisoners, but they were not yet free. The attack on the station had failed, but it had revealed deep cracks inside the Alliance. Evidence recovered by coalition forces showed that the rebels were not acting alone. Several powerful factions had secretly supported them, fearing what a true human, Velari bond might mean for the balance of power. The council had been called to decide everything. Lurie could feel the eyes on her. Some were filled with anger, others with fear, a few with something close to hope. The High Speaker of the Council, a tall being of living crystal, raised a glowing limb. "Lurie of the Velari," the speaker said. "You were promised under treaty law. Your presence here is required. Your voice is optional." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. Lurie did. "My voice is not optional," she said clearly. A murmur spread through the chamber. The High Speaker paused. "Explain." Lurie took a slow breath. She remembered the fear she had felt before meeting Ethan, the stories, the warnings, and she remembered the lift falling into darkness and a human voice telling her to focus and breathe. "I was raised to believe humans would control me," she said. "That they would take what was promised and call it peace. But when violence came, when fear ruled this station, the human beside me did not use me as a shield or a prize. He used himself." She turned slightly toward Ethan, then back to the council. "If this alliance demands sacrifice," she continued, "then it must also demand respect. Otherwise it is not peace, it is obedience." The Velari delegation shifted uneasily. One of the elders stood. "You speak emotionally," he said. "Humans are known to influence others in dangerous ways." Ethan finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried. "I didn't influence her," he said. "I listened to her." That simple sentence echoed through the chamber. Screens activated around the council, displaying recovered footage from the attack. Ethan shielding Lurie from debris. Ethan refusing to abandon her. Ethan fighting without cruelty, disabling attackers instead of killing them when he could. The evidence spoke louder than any argument. A representative from a warrior species leaned forward. "Why risk your life for a treaty symbol?" they asked Ethan. Ethan answered without hesitation. "She's not a symbol, she's a person, and people matter." Silence followed. Not empty silence, but the kind that meant minds were working. The High Speaker turned to the council. "We must decide. Does the treaty remain as written, or do we change it?" That question terrified Lurie more than any explosion, because change meant uncertainty. The council debated for hours. Some argued that tradition must be preserved. Others warned that forcing a bond now would only create future rebellion. Humans, they said, were dangerous not because of their strength, but because of their ideas. Finally, the High Speaker raised its glowing limb again. "The treaty will stand," it announced. "But it will be amended." Lurie's breath caught. "The promise between Lurie of House Selthar and Ethan Cole will remain," the speaker continued. "But it will no longer be binding by force. It will be chosen or rejected by both parties." A wave of sound filled the chamber. Shock, protest, approval. Lurie felt her legs weaken, but she did not fall. The High Speaker turned to her. "The choice is yours." All eyes returned to Lurie. She looked at Ethan. He did not nod. He did not smile. He simply met her gaze and waited. For the first time in her life, no one was telling her what to do. She thought of her homeworld, of the expectations placed on her since birth, of the fear that had followed her across the stars. She also thought of a human standing in front of danger and saying, "She belongs to herself." "I choose," Lurie said slowly, "to continue this bond, Not because I was promised, but because I want to. The chamber erupted. The decision changed everything. In the cycles that followed, the attack was exposed fully. The rebel network collapsed under coalition pressure. Several powerful factions lost their influence, and the fear-driven lies about humanity began to unravel. Lurie and Ethan were placed under protection, not confinement. They were moved to a neutral world where Velari and humans could observe them, not as symbols but as proof. They spent long days talking, sometimes about politics, often about nothing important at all. Ethan showed her human records, music, art, stories of Earth before the stars. Lurie showed him Velari traditions that were gentle and quiet, meant to teach patience and care. They argued sometimes, misunderstood each other, learned. Trust grew slowly like something alive. The galaxy watched. What it saw confused many. The human did not dominate. The alien did not submit. They stood side by side. When a border crisis threatened war months later, it was Lurie and Ethan who were asked to speak. Not because of power, but because both sides trusted them. Ethan spoke of human history, of mistakes, of wars started by fear, of how humanity survived not by being the strongest but by refusing to give up on cooperation. Lurie spoke of Velari pride, of how strength without compassion had nearly destroyed them, of how choosing understanding was not weakness. The crisis ended without battle. Slowly, the image of humanity shifted across the stars. Humans were still dangerous, the galaxy decided, but not because they were cruel. Because they cared. Years later, when historians wrote about the turning point of the Alliance, they did not focus on the treaty or the attack. They wrote about a choice. A Velari girl who was promised and chose freely. And a human who stood beside her and never once tried to own her. That was the moment the galaxy learned the truth. Humanity did not conquer worlds. Humanity changed them, and fate itself was never the same again.